I'm diverging from the books of Daniel and Revelation this morning because this particular parashah is vitally important and it's totally appropriate to what is actually happening at this particular time. What's happening now is also reflected very much in this particular parashah. So I'll focus on the parashah today rather than looking at Daniel and Revelation. Today we have read again about Israel departing from Egypt. It is one of the most well-known stories in the developed world. It has been told and retold so many times that it's hard to know how to speak on the subject without saying the same things that every other teacher and commentator has said in the past. So I want to take you on a journey back in time. I want to move from this 21st century back 3,538 years to the afternoon of the 14th day of Aviv in the year 1513 BCE. I want you to imagine that you have become an eyewitness, like a modern-day journalist, in the midst of the community of Israel. They have just lived through and experienced one of the onslaught of the 10 greatest plagues that have ever struck humanity. But now we are joining Israel as they are preparing to embark on their journey back to the promised land, back to where their forefathers had dwelt 215 years earlier. So we take up the narrative at sundown on the 14th day of Aviv, and it is late in the afternoon, and all the families of Israel have killed their first Pesach lamb. Having placed some of the blood on the sides and top of the doorposts of their house, they're told to go inside, lock the door, and remain. It is a very strange night, like no other night they had ever experienced before. Moshe, our leader, has instructed everyone to close the doors and stay in locked houses right through until dawn. There is no rest all night long. Having roasted our lamb and eaten while we stand dressed and ready to go on our journey, everyone is very tense. Outside, there is a full moon and it is completely silent. Not a single person is out in the streets of Goshen. Then at the first glow of the dawn, as it breaks in the east, there is suddenly a great noise from out in the street. Our neighbours are pouring out of their houses, some of them banging on the door, shouting, "It's time to go. We are leaving Egypt. Pharaoh has finally said he is letting us go." Another neighbour is yelling, "Burn the last of your lamb and let's get going. Today we are leaving Egypt. We are leaving behind a life of slavery." Just think for a moment, 215 years earlier, our forefather, Aqab, arrived with his family of 70 people here in Egypt, and now we're ready to leave. Now we're about to head up the coast road. We're going towards Gaza, back to the land of Canaan, where our forefather Avraham lived so long ago. As the sun rises over the hills, the breeze from the coast brings the smell of the sea. It gives us all a real sense of freedom. Freedom from hard labour and uncomfortable living conditions. Just think, a few days we will be in the land that our people had been promised so long ago, free from slavery and ready to start a new life. However, not far up the coast road, Moshe suddenly changes his direction and starts leading our people towards the desert away from the coast. He is taking us eastward towards the sunrise. He is taking us off into the desert hills. Has he lost his sense of direction? What is he doing? All morning we trek further into the desert towards the barren hills. We are no longer heading in the right direction. Then, by early afternoon, he turns yet again. This time, he starts heading southward. If we keep going in that direction, we will all end up back in Egypt's capital of Ramesses. Having just left the life of slavery, Moshe is now leading us back to the center of where our troubles began. This was not how it was meant to be. We pass near to the small town of Sukkot, but the people are so afraid of our numbers that they do not object to our travels. We just pass on further through into the desert. When is this going to end? When is someone going to challenge Moshe? When are we going to turn back to the coastal road? Finally, the word goes through the camp that we are settling down for the night in a place called Eton, at the edge of the desert. But we still had no idea where Moshe was taking us. Next day, Moshe leads us further westward, back towards Egypt. By now, the pillar of cloud that had been in front of us from the beginning appears to be leading Moshe, but nobody, not even the leadership, are asking why. Since we left Goshen early yesterday morning, the cloud has continually moved along in front of Moshe, and all the other leaders, along with Moshe, just keep on following. It seems strange that the cloud is leading us all the way back to Egypt. We continue on the same route all day. As the sun sets, the cloud up front begins to develop a golden orange glow. The word comes back through the crowd that we are not stopping tonight. Instead, we can continue on walking right through the night. Now, we are following a bright glowing cloud which continues to lead us further southward towards the western coast of the Red Sea, which is deep inside the Egyptian territory. Maybe Moshe and the cloud are taking us back towards the King's Highway. But by morning of the third day, as the sun begins to rise, we realize that through the night we had actually headed past the King's Highway. We are now on the Egyptian side of the Red Sea, or as it's known in today's language, the Gulf of Suez. During the night, we crossed over the King's Highway, and still the cloud keeps on leading us southward. It's totally the wrong way. We are heading straight towards the western shoreline, with no way to escape. On each side of us are hills with steep cliffs, which are becoming higher and higher as we turn. If we turn our backs, we would be heading towards the Nile River and the Egyptian capital of Ramesses. It is now late in the afternoon on the third day, that is the 17th of Aviv. Everyone is tired and hungry, as we have been walking for nearly 24 hours, non-stop, and so we need to settle down for a night's sleep. Suddenly, a cry rings out, the Egyptian army is coming, and they have many chariots. Great clouds of dust are blocking the escape route, with the army advancing with haste. We have just walked into a trap. In front of us is the Red Sea, and is far too wide and deep for us to cross. Behind us are the Egyptians. We are totally trapped. There is no escape. Moshe has led us to a place of certain death. And as for the cloud, it is now moved over and standing between us and the Egyptians. Suddenly, the cloud settles down in front of the rapidly advancing Egyptians. It blocks our view of that advancing army. Then, as the sun sets, the cloud again begins to glow, and it spreads out, blocking the view of the Egyptians completely. Even though we can't see them, we can hear the noise of their horses and chariots getting closer by the minute. Suddenly, a strong east wind starts to blow. Dust is flying everywhere. We could no longer see the column of cloud nor the Egyptians. Deep into the night, the wind gets even stronger, and the sounds of the waves crashing on the shore begin to diminish. A strange feeling, which nobody can explain, descends upon the camp. Through the darkness, the water appears to be receding, and the seabed is becoming visible through the gloom. Now Moshe is standing at the water's edge, with his arms raised high towards the east. The waters are parting and piling up like two giant walls. The dry path across the seabed is beginning to emerge. Slowly, the people near the shoreline begin walking forward into the gap in the sea. It's strange how the seabed feels dry underfoot. All night long, the people first start walking, then begin to run. Men, women, children, even the livestock are all heading into the sea between the towering walls of water. They are all walking on dry ground in the middle of the Red Sea. It is truly a miracle. By mid-morning, the last of the community had crossed, and when they looked back, they saw the cloud had lifted and the Egyptian army was advancing rapidly into the gap in the sea. Once again, our fate appeared to be sealed. In front of us lay an endless desert, and behind us, coming through the sea, are the Egyptians. They are fast approaching in their chariots. Once again, we are trapped. There can be no escape this time. It is inevitable that we are doomed. Suddenly, the walls of water begin to collapse as the Egyptians advance deeper into the seabed. Just as everyone around us is planning how to kill Moshe, then the walls of water completely collapse. And as we watch the Egyptians engulfed in the midst of the sea, by midday, the sea had returned to normal, and the east wind had died down to a gentle breeze. The people of Israel looked out over the sea, and they saw Egyptians. There is not a single one left alive. Israel is free from bondage of Egypt. Our God, Yahweh, has protected us and delivered us through one of the greatest crises of our lives. The hatred towards Moshe suddenly turned to a great jubilation and singing. Miriam led the women in dance, while Moshe led the men into singing a new song, a song of praise for Yahweh, our God. Suddenly, we all realize that we are all singing the same song. Miraculously, everyone knows the words of the song, and we are all singing, "Who is like you, Yahweh, among the mighty? Who is like you, sublime in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders? In your love, you led your people, whom you have redeemed. In your strength, you guide us to your holy abode." The words of the song laid the foundation for the work that Yahweh would later complete on behalf of his people. So let's return back to the 21st century. Let's consider for a moment how we would have reacted in that situation. Would we have faithfully followed that cloud without rebelling? Would we have trusted Moshe and the cloud to bring us safely in the midst of certain death? Were the Israelites who lived through that mind-bending experience any different from those who are living today? We have distinct advantages that we live in a high-tech society and have advanced warning systems. We have perhaps a deeper awareness of our environment in which we live. But would we react any differently? Would we be prepared? Would our technology protect us from the potential disasters? Or have we become complacent and over-reliant on our sophisticated technology? Today's Parashah opens with the words in Shemot, or Exodus, chapter 13, verse 17, where it says, "God did not guide them to the highway that goes through the land of the Perishim," that is Gaza, "because it was too close by. Instead, God thought that his people, upon seeing war, might change their minds and return to Egypt." Nothing has changed. The same territory today is the focal point of the whole world. It is ironic that Donald Trump this very week was talking about emptying that same territory of its inhabitants by sending many of them back to Egypt. The removal of the Gazians to the surrounding nations seems to most of the world to be an impossible task. But just as Yahweh led Israel away from Gaza 3,538 years ago, it may well be now that he is preparing that same territory so that he can lead his people back to that same territory that he once promised to Avraham. That same territory Israel longed to possess since they had turned away in the wilderness on their journey out of Egypt. Since the Exodus, it has always been occupied by other people. Another significant feature that is almost completely overlooked about the events that occurred when Yahweh led his people away from Gaza towards that Red Sea is the timing of each event. Firstly, Yahweh called upon Israel to sacrifice a lamb just before sundown on the 14th of Aviv. Then, having killed the lamb, they were to smear the blood on the doorposts of their houses before sundown. They then had to lock themselves indoors until dawn, because it was during that night that the angel of death passed over their houses, and having seen the blood on the doorposts, went on. At dawn on the 15th of Aviv, they departed in haste, taking with them only matzah, or unleavened bread. It appears that they ate that matzah for the next 7 days. Having set out on the 15th day of Aviv, they travelled for 3.5 days before arriving at the shores of the Red Sea, late on the afternoon of the 17th of Aviv. They camped overnight, and by mid-afternoon on the 18th day of Aviv, they were safely on the other side of the Red Sea, singing a new song while the Egyptians lay dead on the seashore. The silent significance of those dates is that they match perfectly with the death, resurrection, and ascension of Yeshua to the presence of his Father in heaven. Yeshua died at the time that the lamb was sacrificed on the 14th day of Aviv. And he lay, of course, in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. Then around 3 p.m. on the 17th, he was resurrected. Again, about 12 hours later, he ascended to the presence of his Father on Bikurim, the 18th day of Aviv. Is that a coincidence, or is it the plan of Yahweh? Turning back to Shemot chapter 15, verse 22, we are told Moshe led Israel onward from the Sea of Suf. They went out into the Shur desert and travelled 3 days into the desert, and they found no water. Again, coincidence or Yahweh's plan? Those 3 extra days meant that they had reached the end of the week of matzah. But having found the water was undrinkable, they were unable to make fresh bread. Remember, they'd taken their kneading bowls when they left Egypt. They doubtless took flour with them, but they didn't have time to allow it to leaven. So they only ate matzah. That is, until Yahweh told Moshe how to make the water drinkable. They quenched their thirst and made the first of the fresh bread to eat in place of matzah. Their week of matzah had ended. Moving on to chapter 16, we find, having spent downtime in Elim, where there are 12 springs and 70 palm trees and plenty of water, we see in verses 1 through 3, we find that yet another problem had arisen. They had travelled from Elim, and the whole community of Israel had arrived in the Sin desert between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the 2nd month after leaving Egypt. There in the desert, the whole community of the people of Israel grumbled against Moshe and Aaron. The people of Israel said to them, "We wish Yahweh had used his own hand to kill kill us off in Egypt. There we sat around the pots, meat boiling, and we had much food as we wanted. But now we have taken us into the desert to let the whole assembly starve to death. It was now 1 whole month since they had left Egypt. So the flour that they had brought out with them and had baked at Marah had been totally consumed. They could not find any wild barley, or would have been able to glean if they had gone directly up the coast road to Gaza. They were yet again being tested. But as we read in the rest of chapter 16, Yahweh by no means let them starve to death. Instead, he gave them manna from heaven, and at the same time he introduced the weekly Shabbat. Through giving the double portion of manna on the 6th day, they learned to rest on the 7th day each week. Even with the daily sustenance from heaven, Israel was still not satisfied with their nourishment. They wanted meat, so they started grumbling yet again. So in his grace, Yahweh provided them with quail at dusk and manna at dawn. But even then, in verses 28 through 30, Yahweh said to Moshe, "How long will you refuse to observe my mitzvot and teachings? Look, Yahweh has given you Shabbat. This is why he is providing bread for 2 days on the 6th day. Each of you stay where you are. No one is to leave his place on the 7th day." So the people rested on that 7th day. Moving on to chapter 17, the focus changes. Because in verse 1 we are told the whole community of the people of Israel left the Sinai desert, travelling in stages, as Yahweh had ordered, and camped at Rephidim. But how did they come to be in the Sinai desert? And why did they end up in Rephidim? If we look at the map, we see that when they left Elim, they travelled toward the Sea of Suf. Then they had to turn back into the Sinai desert. Why? The answer lies in Bamidbar, or Numbers, chapter 33, verses 9 through 11, where we are told they moved on from Marah, that's where the bitter water was turned sweet, and came to Elim. In Elim, there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. So they camped there. They moved on from Elim and came to the Sea of Suf. They moved from the Sea of Suf and camped in the Sinai desert. So what are we seeing here? Why did Moshe lead them to the shores of the Sea of Suf? Remember, they were on their way to Mount Horev, or Sinai, as Yahweh had instructed Moshe when he had the encounter at the burning bush. Moshe knew where Mount Horev was, and yet he had just led the people to yet another sea crossing. Had Moshe lost his way? I don't think so, because when he returned to Egypt, I believe he walked across that same territory. But at that stage, there was no Gulf of Aqab, because it did not exist. I believe it makes sense that at the time the waters of the Red Sea, that is the Gulf of Suez, parted company, the Rift Valley, which is also part of the Gulf of Aqab, split in two. If that is true, then Moshe was right to lead the people in that direction, because he should not have encountered a water barrier between himself and Mount Horev. So as the map shows, they had to journey round the head of the Gulf of Aqab, above what we now know as Eilat, before they could head southward again towards Rephidim. That is why, in chapter 17, verse 8, we are told that the Amalekites came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Then our Parashah concludes in chapter 17, verse 14 through 16, with the words, Yahweh said to Moshe, Write this in a book so that it will be remembered, and tell it to Yehoshua. I will completely blot out any memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moshe built an altar there and called it Yahweh Nissi. Yahweh is my banner, or miracle. And said, because their hand was against the throne of Yahweh will fight Amalek from generation to generation. So who were the people of Amalek? They were and still are descendants of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, about whom Shaul speaks in Romans chapter 9, verses 11 through 13. Before they, the twins, were born, before they had done anything either good or bad, it was said to their mother Rivkah, the older will serve the younger. This accords with what is written, Yaakov I loved, Esau I hated. Here Shaul was quoting directly from the words of Malachi 1 verses 1 through 3. We see, by turning back to the beginning of the Parashah, if Yahweh had allowed Moshe to continue leading Israel up the coast road to Gaza, they would never have ended up at Mount Horev. Only by taking his people on a traumatic and torturous journey through the Red Sea crossing and on through the dry, lifeless wilderness could he show them that in spite of their grumbling and defiance, he still loved them and cared for them. Never did Yahweh ever allow his people to be tested beyond what they could endure. Every time they encountered a setback, he came to their rescue at the right moment. What we are seeing in Gaza and Eretz-Yisra'el today is a direct reflection of how Yahweh had dealt with his people 3,538 years ago. Each time they grumbled and defied their leader Moshe, they ended up increasing their hardship. But each occasion, Yahweh came to their rescue at the right moment. So if we believe the scriptural narrative as it is presented and read between the lines with the support of the teaching of the Ruach HaKodesh, we can rest assured that Yahweh will continue to support Israel. However, having said that, we must also recognize that Yahweh said in Psalm 106, verse 8, yet he saved them for his own name's sake, to make known his own mighty power. So as Talmudim of Yeshua, we also need to trust and listen to the words of wisdom that usher forth from this week's Parashah as we await the return of Yeshua. Shabbat Shalom.